Thank you for giving me the opportunity to address this commission on behalf of Canada's National Firearms Association. My name is Blair Hagen, and I am Executive Vice President of Canada's National Firearms Association, Canada's oldest firearms rights and freedoms advocacy organization. Canada's National Firearms Association has participated in this process with a very serious intent of assisting this commission in identifying the real facts and exposing the real circumstances of this very serious national tragedy. We hope this commission accepts this assistance with our sincere spirit and intention of finding real solutions and pathways in preventing mass tragedies and acts of violence, such as the Nova Scotia mass casualty event, from occurring in the future. We have provided a history of the politics and failures of Canadian firearms laws and regulations over the period of the last 40 years, the reasons for those failures, and the civil disarmament agenda that gave birth to them. But frankly, we are confused by the Commission's focus and emphasis on the firearms issue, especially in light of the present federal government's legislative agenda on firearms. The perpetrator of the Nova Scotia mass casualty event was not authorized by law to be in possession of any firearm. He was completely outside of the scope of the Canada Firearms Program and all of the regulations imposed by the Firearms Act. He had been investigated and charged in the past and could not have purchased or possessed firearms legally. He was known to police. He had many run-ins with the law. He had been previously investigated for a variety of serious events. He was a recidivist who generated through his antisocial behavior and actions a very long history with the police. None of that mattered. The perpetrator planned this incredible act of violence for a very long period of time, carefully accumulating the tools and accessories he needed, unlawfully if need be, in complete contempt and total disregard for any law or regulation. The laws and regulations had no effect. It could not have had any effect, as the perpetrator had no concern and had not submitted himself to them. End of story. Someone denied the legal means and opportunities to acquire the tools necessary to commit an offense will simply acquire them illegally. Someone who already has contempt for human life, and especially someone who has conspired and planned to take human lives in such an extensive and comprehensive manner, will not be bound or deterred by any law or regulation, only by an equal or greater force. The police cannot be everywhere. The RCMP cannot be everywhere. Where use of force in one's own defense, the defense of others, and in the defense of the laws of Canada is reserved by government, law, and regulation exclusively to the state and its representatives in law enforcement, ultimately, no one can ever be safe. It is logically, statistically, and realistically impossible. The fact that the perpetrator of this tragedy targeted and murdered among his 22 victims a police officer, apparently with no compunction, makes the question of what kind of firearms laws or regulations might have prevented this event from ever occurring entirely absurd and irrelevant. Ridiculous even. This was a deranged individual who initially met little or no resistance to his assaults. And the very real question to this is, why was this the case? It might as well be discussed what changes to the Provincial Motor Vehicle Act or the Canada Agricultural Act might have prevented this mass casualty event in Nova Scotia, and that would have had the same effect as discussing or debating firearms. The answer to that is none, and it applies to firearms laws and regulations as well. Not only do the facts contributing to this tragedy condemn the efficacy of today's firearms laws, they condemn the merit and usefulness of firearms laws and legislation, which have been imposed with great controversy, dispute, and expense in Canada over the last 40 years. The rights and freedoms of Canadians have been sacrificed with contempt and derision by governments, not for any practical purposes for public safety, but rather to achieve a means to an end through stimulating a legislative process targeting not criminals or madmen, but the rights, freedoms, property, and culture of Canadians. Now, apparently, there are allegations that the Liberal government may have engaged in political interference in this process and with the RCMP. If this commission focuses exclusively on the firearms issue, it will not have done its job. It will have provided no solutions for public safety, and Canadians will be no closer to the truth of the circumstances and facts that are pertinent to just what precipitated and contributed to this national tragedy. And that will be a tragedy of process and a tragedy of political malfeasance in connection with driving a narrative towards arriving at a preconceived result by a government hell-bent on furthering its civil disarmament agenda. This will have been a politically poisoned process. A more appropriate conclusion to this process would be to find recommendations on how Canadians can be empowered to provide for their own self-defense and in defense of their fellow Canadians and the laws of Canada. The lack of discussion on this in this process is glaring in its absence, and it is not unnoticed. This concludes my submission to the Commission. I thank the Commission and will end by saying Canada's National Firearms Association will never cease fighting for fundamental firearms law reforms that target individuals, such as the perpetrator of the Nova Scotia mass casualty event, the criminals and sociopaths who now indiscriminately and without fear of the law commit acts of violence on the streets of our cities and communities, and will continue to fight for reforms that truly respect the rights, freedoms, property, and culture of Canadians. I thank you.